when I first came in the program, I could not even finish reading chapter 5. I mean, I just couldn't. I mean, it was a real struggle for me. And then, what also I realized too is that my anxiety really interferes with me functioning. As soon as I get nervous, it's like my brain gets jumbled.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, like I was training with Dr. Kempler, and we used to do these demonstrations right up in front of a group of 100 therapists. And I'd be up there with him, he'd be interviewing a family, and I'd be his co-therapist, right? And so after 5 minutes, he had this idea that after 5 minutes, somebody tells you what's wrong with them and what you need to do to help them to deal with their life better, right? After 5 minutes, right? So he'd talk to this family for 5 minutes, and then he'd turn to me and he'd go, "Okay, Alan, it's been 5 minutes." And I'm sitting there like shell shocked, right? And what do you want me to say? He says, "What just happened here with this family?" And literally, I would go blank. I would go blank. I think I'm a smart guy, but my IQ probably dropped to 70 at that moment. I swear it dropped to 70 because the anxiety flooded me
Right.
and I couldn't think.
Yeah.
So that's such a common experience we have. And I just have a lot of compassion for that. And I thank you for having the courage to hang in there and not throwing that down and say, screw this and walking out. Thank you.
You're welcome. I thank you for acknowledging my anxiety.
Yes. Yeah. I
I
appreciate
appreciate
that.
that.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, that's what we do here at the Wilson House, right? We grow and we confront things and we face things and talk about things and try to learn from our experience. Um, Boy, this has been quite a journey. And those of you that have stuck with us now for this journey through the 12 steps from the perspective of the 12 steps and 12 traditions that Bill Wilson wrote back in the early 1950s. It's been a remarkable thing. And, I think one of the things that's been revealed is that Bill's understanding of this was evolving. And I can say that in Tom Potash and Tom Rutledge and Julia and Patrick Newman and Herb Kane, when we sit down and we start to talk about the experience we have, we all experience the same thing. It's like that phrase, more will be revealed, is so much of a harbinger, right, of things to come. And more has been revealed. And I hope that we're taking what Bill's done, honoring his work. And I think it really is his fourth legacy in the program. He left us the steps. He and Dr. Bob left us the steps, the General Service Office to share this information, the traditions, right, for our group. But I think his fourth legacy was emotional sobriety. And I hope we've done a good service in honoring what he's done and trying to bring it to you and share with you about this. And tonight we're going to be talking, and boy, it's been quite a journey getting to 12, right? If we've worked the steps from what I've encouraged everybody to think about from the second pass through the steps, doing a second first step. This one focused on your powerlessness over your fact that you're stuck in your growth and development, that you're stuck at the it's all about me stage, right? And that it's hard to shake that and grow beyond that. And we can't develop emotional sobriety until we develop the humility that Bill talks about is so essential to our experience in recovery. That humility really helps us start to look at some of these important principles that can help us develop the best possible attitude and concepts that can help us live, a good life. Bill calls it the theme of this is the joy of living. And if you were with Tom in the pre-workshop that goes on from 8 to 9 o'clock, he brought up such a great point about joy doesn't just come from things going our way. But the joy that we're talking about from an emotional sobriety perspective is the joy you feel when you start to have an appropriate and honest relationship with life and you start functioning better. Regardless of whether you're in a lot of pain and you're suffering and you're struggling with that, the way you struggle with it, at the end of that struggle, if you struggle well, you will have more wisdom in your life. That's the joy of living, that no matter what happens to us, that we can be okay even if. And that's such an important principle that we're learning and such an important concept because then when things happen, Tom was sharing, I think earlier he had a tough week and some things were going on. It wasn't the things that were going on that caused the problem, it was the way that he was connected to it. And that's always the case. The problem is never the problem. The problem is how we are coping with what our experience is. So here we are. We're learning something about that by the time we get to step 12. I've made some slides for tonight, so I'm going to share them with you right now. All right, so here we are, step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Well, last time that I presented, I talked about the spiritual awakening, and I think Herb was with you last week while I was on my way to Comic-Con in New York and talked further about the 12 steps. But I'm not going to go into the spiritual awakening part. So I want to look at some other aspects of step 12. So this is what Bill said in step 12. He says, as because of our spiritual awakening, he goes, these were new attitudes that finally brought us an inner strength and peace that could not be deeply shaken, that should be, by the shortcomings of others or by any calamity not of our own making. You see, one of the things that emotional sobriety does, it creates a much sturdier foundation to our lives. I think of it as almost an unshakable foundation. Now, that doesn't mean at times we don't get knocked off balance because we will, but it's unshakable in that we have the resilience because of the way we're looking at the experience we're having to recover our balance when we're knocked off balance. Now, sometimes I can be knocked off balance and it takes weeks. Sometimes it takes a year to regain that balance. Sometimes it can be like this. I can find a way that, oh my God, I got it now. I see what I'm doing. I see what my expectation is. And I unhook that expectation. Sometimes those expectations are so deeply buried in my unconscious, it takes a lot of work to identify what they are. But I have found if I have a persistent commitment and effort to continue to explore and have curiosity about it, they will eventually reveal themselves to me. And as soon as I can name it, I can tame it. I'll say that again. As soon as you name it, you can tame it. Acceptance is such an important part of this experience. In fact, in a couple weeks, we're doing a all-day workshop around acceptance and emotional sobriety. Tom will be posting a flyer for that in the chat room. Bill goes on to say that, but today, in well-matured AAs, these distorted drives have been restored to something like their true nature or their true purpose. See, if you remember the beginning of Bill's letter, where he talked about that emotional sobriety, when he defined it, right, he talked about it as balance, right, and real maturity, which is to say humility in our relations with ourselves, with others. He says with God. I also add to that with life itself. Balance. What does balance mean? These distorted drives have been restored. You see, recovery is not about erasing yourself. A lot of people think that in the program, our job is to get rid of self. And I think that that's misleading. I think what we're really trying to do is have a relationship with ourself that is balanced in our relationships with others. You know, I came across this idea that emotional sobriety is when I learn to act for myself without being selfish. When I act for myself without being selfish, can you see the balance in that, right? I'm really honoring what's going on with me, but I'm not doing it at your expense. We act for others without losing ourselves. See, that's the balance. That's balancing these drives. My desire to be of value to you so I can have what I call true cooperation. True cooperation is about having cooperation with integrity. I do what you want me to do because I want to do it. Not because I'm trying to be liked by you, but because I think that's who I want to be in my relationship with you. So I don't need you to appreciate it if I do it for you. If you do that, that's fine. But the appreciation I get is the reward, the intrinsic reward that I feel for doing something that I want to do. And if it's for you and I care about you, that's, adds to it. You see, that's the balance that we're trying to restore that's nobody's ever helped us with. I know nothing about these ideas that I'm talking to you about. What was that saying Tom had in the last meeting about that? All he knows is based on all the ignorance he's had up to this point in time.
Yeah, wisdom is the sum of everything I don't know, and
Yeah, wisdom
that
is the sum of everything, of all my ignorance and everything I don't know. I can relate to that. I mean, I think that that's true for me. He goes on to say that we no longer strive to dominate or rule those about us in order to gain self-importance. You see, that's the adding self at the expense of somebody else, right? That's being selfish. That's being motivated by my self-interest, and I'm losing touch with you. We call that, when we describe that kind of relationship, it's an I'm about myself, but I'm treating you as an it. You're not a person anymore. You're just an object that I'm manipulating and dealing with. I'm not having a relationship with you. I'm having a relationship with myself. You just happen to be the object of my own affection towards myself. You're not the object of my affection. You're not the subject of my affection. You're the object of my affection. I to it relationships are so much a symptom of our growth disorder, our immaturity. As we mature, we move to having an I to thou relationship. I'm important, you're important. I'm the subject, you're the subject. We connect in a very personal way. I don't bring in expectations on what you're supposed to do to make me feel okay. I don't look at you instrumentally like, what can you do? Are you going to approve of me or disapprove of me? I'm not interested in that. I don't care because I'm self-validated. I don't need that. But if I'm immature, guess what? Do you like me now? Am I okay? Please love me. Please, please, mommy. Yeah, right now. He goes on to say, we no longer seek fame and honor in order to be praised. Once again, we're looking for what? Other validated self-esteem. Tell me I'm doing well. Please pat me on the back. Tell me I'm doing a good job. As I get more and more grounded in emotional sobriety, I don't need you to tell me I'm doing a good job. I am the final arbiter and sifter of my experience. I'll decide if I like the job I'm doing or not. If you like it, fine, you can like it. But it doesn't mean anything to me unless I also agree with you. No, maybe I'm being harsh on myself. That's something to look at. I'm open to that possibility. But what I'm saying is that when I'm operating from this position of emotional sobriety, I'm not overly dependent on what you're doing. He goes on to say that when by devoted service to family, friends, business, or community, we attract widespread affection and are sometimes singled out for posts of greater responsibility and trust, we try to be humbly grateful for that experience and exert ourselves the more in a spirit of love and service. You see, we don't get lost in, oh, look how great I am. We come into it and say, wow, I'm glad I'm of value. What else can I do to be of value? How can I do this? Now, as you're going to see, it turns out being of value and integrating that into our life and making that a purpose of our life helps us become who we are and what we can be. There's a part in each and every one of us that's altruistic, that wants to make a difference in somebody's life. And the closer that person is to us, the more meaningful they are, the more value we want to be. Most relationships that end, and especially divorces that end, the couples no longer feel they're of value to each other. They've lost that sense, that experience. Doesn't matter I'm in your life. You know, you can hire somebody to do the things I'm doing, right? I'm not of any value to you, or you're not of any value to me. It goes both ways. And that's the other interesting thing about relationships is is that whatever is I'm experiencing on my side of a relationship, you're going to have an analogous experience. So if I'm feeling like I'm not of value, guess what? You're going to feel like you're not of value. You're going to have a similar experience. If I feel misunderstood, guess what you're going to feel? Misunderstood. If I feel abused, guess what you're going to feel? Abused and taken advantage of. It's the darndest thing. The way that Dr. Kempler described it, he says, when we're in a relationship, we're in the same room, but we're in different corners. And we're looking at the relationship from our respective corner of the room. Like right now, if I described this room, this conference room we're sitting in here at the Wilson House, I would see a mirror on the wall, lights. I'd see Paula sitting on the couch. I'd see all of you across this way. And, I see the clock on the wall. If I asked Tom to describe the room, he's going to look at it very differently. What are you going to see, Tom, if you describe it?
You can see the windows out to the street, you can see the lights that don't work on the wall.
See what he focused on, the lights that don't work on the wall. We'll talk to Tom about that this weekend. We'll get into that later on. But but my point is if we're in a relationship and I'm talking about my experience and then he starts to talk about his, I said, and I don't respect the difference, I'm going to say to him, what is wrong with you? What the hell are you looking at? This is the problem. You don't show up for our relationship. You're not here. You're not present to what's going on. What the hell do you mean there's a light not working on a wall? All the lights I see are working. See, if we get into then it turns into a power struggle. Who's right? And all our energy goes into that. How many times have we done that? I've done it. You've done it. We all do it. He goes, true leadership we find depends upon able example and not upon vain display of power and glory. We strive for attraction, not promotion. When I work with families and they've got kids, I say, don't lead with your mouth, lead with your feet. Be an example for your children. Show them how you're dealing with things. That's going to impact your kids more than anything you say to them, is how you behave with them and how you behave in general as a person. They're learning everything. They're soaking up. They're a sponge. Somebody talked about being a sponge the other day when I was talking to them. They're a sponge. They're just soaking up what's going on around them. And most of the things we learn growing up are not things we're told. They're things we see. And we learn and imitate and emulate those things we see. Well, if you have kids, that's scary, because that means, boy, you're setting an example for them. Can you tell your kids you're wrong? Can you say I made a mistake? Things like that are really important. Okay, so I said that being of value and finding our purpose in our life is really important. This is Viktor Frankl. He's the author of A Man's Search for Meaning. And boy, it's an incredible book. There's a reason it's sold probably around 8 million copies by now. He talked about in the book his experiences, the first half of the book were his experiences in the Nazi concentration camps. He was actually taken to four different camps. The last one he was at was Auschwitz. And excuse me, as a psychiatrist, he was very interested and curious about how did the men around him deal with what was going on. Now, I think all of us would agree that you can't think in many cases of a more, abhorrent, heinous, situation. I mean, inhumanity was just cruelty and sadism was all around us. So how can someone that's in that situation find some way of coping with this? And, at another point, I'll share this stuff about what he discovered, but it was amazing because it was like he had an AA meeting at Auschwitz. Because what he said is that we had to learn ourselves and then we had to share with other despairing men. Now, doesn't that sound like an AA meeting? We had to learn ourselves and then we had to share with other despairing men that it did not matter what we expected from life. Think about that. If I expected that guard to have some humanity, not going to happen. I'm setting myself up for a big problem. All I can do is become demoralized, depressed, and a lot of these men died from depression because they saw no hope in anything, right? If this is humanity, I don't want to be a part of it. This sucks. Let me cash in my membership, so to speak. So the men had to surrender their expectations about how things were supposed to be and learn to deal with reality as it was. He said we had to see ourselves as those who were being challenged by life and this experience we were having in life, and that our job was to find the best way to deal with whatever was going on at that particular time. Now, if you've heard me say anything about emotional sobriety, you've heard me pound that drum a lot, right? That's what emotional sobriety is. Well, he went on to say, because he also saw that those men that survived found purpose even in the darkest moments of their life and of their experience. And this is what he said. He says, true meaning of life is to be discovered in the world rather than within man or his own psyche. Now, take that in. He's not denying the importance of our experience, our personal experience. What he is saying is my meaning comes from how I am dealing with what's going on in the world around me. I mean, it's brilliant. He goes on to say, he says, I have termed this constitutive characteristic the self-transcendence of human experience, of existence. The self-transcendence. I move beyond my selfish self. I move beyond, in our program, we would say ego. He says it points to the fact that being human always points and is directed to something or someone other than oneself. Interesting. The more one forgets himself, the hidden and raging Mr. Hyde is what we're talking about, right? Not Dr. Jekyll. By giving himself to a cause to serve or another person to love, now that's what emotional sobriety is, right? I cooperate with integrity. I act for myself, but in relationship to you, right? Not selfishly. I do things for you, but I don't lose myself. I want to be of value to you because I want to be of value, not because you're going to tell me I'm a good boy, not because you're going to pat me on my bald head and rub my head. You just because you're going to say, because I'm going to say, I feel good about being of value. I want to be of value. It's important to me as a person. He goes, the more by giving himself to a cause to serve another person or to love, the more human he is, and the more he actualizes himself. Step 12 is telling us that we've actualized ourselves, that we're now on that journey of becoming whole. We're honoring all the different parts of ourselves. We're trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. You know, I've heard me define mental health as an appropriate balance and coordination of all of what we are. An appropriate balance of, so it's honoring the part of me that wants to be a purpose, part of me that wants to be a part of me that wants to honor myself, at the same time honor you. How do I put all those together? Well, it's a challenge. Now, that goes on to the other part of this step, which we'll get into in a minute. Bill says, with each passing day of our lives, may every one of us sense more deeply. Now, this is the call to emotional sobriety. The inner meaning of AA's simple prayer: God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, courage to change the things we can, and wisdom to know the difference. How with each passing day we can understand and deepen the inner meaning of that serenity prayer and how it's so intimately related to what we're talking about as emotional sobriety. So, what we have talked about is that emotional sobriety creates a freedom. The 12 steps, their expressly stated purpose from Bill's point of view is that the 12 steps, when you work them, will help you find emotional sobriety. Emotional sobriety creates emotional freedom, a state of emotional freedom. How? By maturing, which means learning from our experience. Maturity is about moving from a simple state of being to a more complex state. That's how we grow. We grow that way within our mother's womb. We start out to be a very simple two-cell organism that comes together and that divides and becomes more and more complex. Then we're born, you know, the complexity, the movement from where we are to what's next is just an automatic thing. We call it a biological imperative. You're going to move towards what you can be automatically, biologically. It's instinctual. It's wired inside of you. Nobody has to tell a child after the child has been getting oxygen from the mother's umbilical cord that when they're born, the cord is cut, the child doesn't have a source of oxygen. What does it do? It takes over the responsibility to breathe. It inhales and exhales, inhales and exhales. Our first act of self-support is breathing. Now we go on that way. At 1 year old, we want to walk, not because somebody tells you. You don't have a parent standing over you. All right, Tom, quit crawling around the house. Get up off your fours. You know, start walking around here. I'm tired of carrying you. Now, imagine somebody had that experience somewhere in life. It got to be, right? Some parent did some that kind of, but it doesn't happen because we want to move that way. You want to walk. I wanted to walk. Then I wanted to run, right? Because I keep wanting more complexity, right? To move towards a more complex state. So that's what happens. Emotionally, it becomes a whole different ball of wax. It doesn't happen as easily. It happens through learning, and that learning has to be encouraged when we're young. When it's not, then we grow up with holes in our functioning, right? We just are not complete human beings. We're fragmented. As we move into the emotional sobriety, our job is to fill the holes. That's one way to think about it. How do we do that? By having experience. So listen to what Dr. Siegel says about integration. He says integration is the key mechanism beneath both the absence of illness, meaning immaturity, right? And the presence of well-being, which means maturity. It's the mechanism beneath both. Because when you don't integrate your experiences, you are stuck in your development. You don't grow. Now, oftentimes you hear people say, you know, my development got arrested when I started drinking and using. I think that's partly true. No question about it. Doesn't help. Drinking and doing other drugs than alcohol doesn't help in terms of learning from your experience. You develop certain experience. If you read my book, 12 Stupid Things That Mess Up Recovery, there's a thing called state dependent learning. And the stuff you learn when you're drinking and using does not generalize into the rest of your life. It's a fascinating way of understanding learning. But what our job is to start growing ourselves up. So he says the key to that is the linkage of differentiated elements of a system of our experience. In other words, you take your experience, you look at your patterns, you look at your habits. That's what we do in emotional sobriety, right? Try to become aware of the habitual ways that we function and the patterns that that takes. As we see that, we start connecting the dots. Go, oh my God, underneath all of this was my emotional dependency. Look at how it manifested in this way. Look at how it manifested that way. Look at how I gave away my emotional center of gravity. Look at how I put myself in a position of being a victim. Over and over again, we start to do this learning. We now, it starts to illuminate, he calls it a direct pathway towards health, towards growing up. We do that automatically, perceptually. You do not look at these black shapes independently. Because of what we know about the psychology of perception, you organize these and give that perception meaning. You connect the dots. How did you connect the dots? What did you see when you looked at this? Hopefully, a jet plane, right? Because that's how we organize that. That's the called, what we're doing is we're integrating the perceptual experience we have. We're taking the black and we're not looking at the white pieces. We're looking at the black. The white falls in their background, the black jumps foreground. You see that? Right? And so what we do is we see the outline of a plane and we see it as a whole. We don't see it as a part. We see it as whole. If you just covered the rest of it and just saw part of it and just looked at one element of it, you wouldn't know it's a plane. You couldn't integrate the information. You have to be able to perceive all of the different elements so that you can put them together. That's the importance of taking a look at ourselves and starting to do the work we're doing. I just said that. So when differentiation is blocked, integration cannot occur. Without the movement towards integration, the entire system moves away from complexity, away from harmony, into disintegration. Meaning we're stuck. We can't learn from the experience we're having. If I only look at one part, now you're going to see how this connects to this. Because if I'm all focused on it's all about me, and I'm looking at an experience I have, and all I'm looking at is what this means about me, what am I doing? I'm just focusing on one aspect of the experience I'm having. I'm not seeing you. I'm not seeing what's going on around me. I'm not taking into account the whole totality of the experience. I am focused because of my immaturity on what does this mean about me? Do you like me or don't you like me? You know, am I going to be okay or not okay? Right? That kind of thing. Do I need to protect myself or can I relax? That kind of a thing. So I'm not going to be able to integrate, right? This is why it's so important that we grow ourselves in this direction. When there is only differentiation, there's no linkage. Integration is also blocked. And we also move away from complexity, but this time towards chaos. Okay. This is the way that Dr. Brandon talks about integrity. He says integrity is the integration of experiences, learning from our experience. I'm going to be doing a workshop for Divided Sky tomorrow, and that's going to be the whole focus of that workshop is going to be learning from our experience. Um, it's having an honest and appropriate relationship with reality. Certain attitudes, as we said, that steps 6 and 7 are our pivot towards the best attitudes that we can have towards life. Our convictions, standards, belief, and behavior. When our behavior is congruent with our professed values, when ideals and practice match up, we have integrity. We're operating from a sense of wholeness. So this is what Bill said, and this is going to wrap up our discussion of the 12 steps. That sobriety is only the bare beginning. It's only the first gift of the first awakening. And if more gifts are to be received, our awakening has to go on. And if it does go on, we find that bit by bit by bit, we can discard the old life, the one that didn't work, for a new life that can and does work under any conditions whatever. Regardless of worldly success or failure, regardless of pain or joy, regardless of sickness or health, or even of death itself, a new life of endless possibilities can be lived if we are willing to continue our awakening. Amen. All right. Well, that was a mouthful, wasn't it? My goodness. Let me invite my friend Tom and Julia in and Tom Potash and see if you guys have any comments you want to make before we wrap up tonight. There's Tom.
Yeah.
Here's Tom. Here's Johnny.
Oh,
There's Alan.
Alan.
There's Julia. Hi, Julia.
Julia.
Hello. Great meeting tonight.
Can you hear her? Tom,
Was that?
can you hear her?
No, I can't.
Julia, say something again. I think for
Oh.
some reason.
Oh, turn up your volume.
Oh, okay.
I'm unmuted. Can you guys hear me?
All right, perfect. Now we can hear you.
Yeah. Shh.
Oh, I'm saying great. No,
Great.
no, it was a great meeting. Thank you so much. Yeah, I have very desperate thoughts, maybe. I really love the quote from the 12 and 12. I was rereading it tonight. These were the new attitudes that finally brought many of us an inner strength and peace that could not be deeply shaken by shortcomings of others or by any calamity not of our own making. And I'm still kind of wrapping my head around that. Yeah, it's a really beautiful thought, right? That inner stillness and resilience and stability. And I've had a taste of that in my recovery. But I'm definitely not there. Um, not all the time, but I know when I'm not there. And I know what I can do to help me rebalance when I'm off the beam, as he says a few times too. Um, and then the other thing I was thinking was when you were talking about the importance of being of value to other people, and how that, for me gives meaning to my life. It made me think of an Einstein quote, that, the idea that our separation from each other is an optical illusion of consciousness. And where I'm going with that is,
Cool.
in when I'm in my,
Mystical.
yes, it sounds mystical, but when we're selfish and, driven by our dependencies on other people and everything's about me, that is a very lonely place to be. It's like a jail of being separate, right? That picture that Herb has. And I think, when we're of value and of service to others, it breaks down. We're able to see how deeply connected we are to other people, because I think we all need to feel like we belong, which doesn't mean I need to, that I'm dependent on your opinion of me. But I do think we need to know we're connected and that we belong.
Right on.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Well, let me just read you some notes that I wrote down earlier. Letting go of old ways of identifying ourselves, which is a lifetime of work, and always changing. And streamlined wisdom is I am here to learn, to be the best version of myself, and to be of service to others. The more simplistic I can get that in my mind, that I wake up every morning, the easier my life is emotionally. It's like I'm relaxed. And then I get distracted sometimes and write the wrong notes about the wrong things. I wrote about biological imperative. I wrote, I want to breathe, I want to walk, but I don't want to run. And then I also wrote one more note, which was my development got arrested because it's a criminal.
Oh, that is cute.
It's the truth.
He's a criminal. He stole your true self, Tom. He stole your
That's
true
right.
self.
You did. But no, beautiful. And I think, I mean, I think this run through the, and it's hard to say because it's always my favorite, which is probably because we're just all in the moment. But I've really enjoyed this last trip through the 12 steps that we've just wrapped up. It's been very, as always, but I think this has been particularly enlightening for me. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, just so much information and so much context that you put around the 12 step. And I go back to the 12 and 12 all the time just because it is the 12 step and the 12 and 12 just really illuminates emotional sobriety, and it really points out where it shows up in our lives, or the dependency shows up in our lives, and the way out. Um, the line on in this book, it's 115, like, our demand for emotional security for our own way had constantly thrown us into unworkable relations with other people. Though we were sometimes quite unconscious of this, the result had always been the same. Either we had tried to play God and dominate those about us, or we had insisted on being dependent upon them. And it goes on. It's just, when I read that, I'm like, yeah, I know. Like, thanks for putting it into, black and white, what the problem was. And then, he goes in on later to talk about, how to unwind this, right? All this emotional dependency and all it goes back to the demands and, the expectations. And, now I'm sitting on Alan's side of the room and I see things from his perspective. So we could be joined in our experience in the moment. And I don't have to tell him, you're crazy. The lights on the wall don't work. And I wanted them for better lighting here in the meeting. And, he could see it himself. Those are the lights. But, the need to be right and to, and which for me means be right, which really means be accepted, which means be loved and not be cast out. Just that the level of anxiety that creates for me, right? And to start to be okay, again, not knowing that I won't be erased by it, and that it won't kill me. It's going to be uncomfortable, but at least, I can, sit through it and learn from it, and then, join with the other person and say like, this is happening to me. This is why I'm, not not joining with you in this experience or this relationship or this argument, whatever it is. Just being okay with that, it has, opened up doors for me.